Hey guys, so I'm really nervous to post this video and film it because Stanley Kubrick is so loved, even beyond the horror community. And I do kind of go in more depth than just what takes place and transpires in The Shining and, you know, his questionable directing techniques and things like that. I kind of talk a little bit more about another movie, and there's probably so much more I could expand on. But I want this video to be more of like an educational one, like just did you know kind of facts versus actually like canceling Kubrick. It's the internet, you know, the title sounds good to me, and I thought it was a cool title, so I'm not really out here trying to cancel Stanley Kubrick or anything. I'm not trying to say to boycott all his movies by any means. Obviously my last iteration of this video of toxic horror movie sets was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and that's one of my favorite movies of all time. So, you know, I'm not trying to say to cancel these movies or boycott these movies or they should never have been made or anything like that. It was a different time when these movies were made, and I want to acknowledge that. I'm not saying Stanley Kubrick was a horrible human being who should never have, you know, been supported by Hollywood or anything like that. I'm not really trying to cancel him. It's just a title of the video, so I don't want you all coming for me. But I do want to talk about his questionable filming techniques and his perfectionism and how toxic he was to work with, and that is just facts, or at least from statements of people who actually worked with him. But before we get into all of that, I just want to thank Shudder for sponsoring today's video. Shudder is, of course, a premium streaming service for all things horror, thriller, and suspense, and has the fastest growing collection with new horror added every single week. Their collection includes blockbuster hits, horror classics, and original and exclusive content such as Vicious Fun, the Mortuary Collection, and PG Psycho Gorman. And of course, the hit Creepshow TV series from executive producer Greg Nicotero from The Walking Dead, and season 3 actually just came out recently. I just watched a Shudder exclusive movie called Mosquito State, and oh my gosh, so good. It's about bugs, you know, mosquitoes, so if that kind of grosses you out, be warned of that, but it is such a bizarre artsy movie that was so entertaining. They also recently released VHS 94, of course, which I've talked about before, horror noir, the Boulet Brothers Dragula, so there's tons of cool horror stuff streaming on there. So you can stream all the best horror, thriller, and supernatural content completely ad-free on all of your devices, including iOS and Android, Xbox One, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and Google Chromecast, all for $5.99 a month or $56.99 per year. Or of course, you can try Shudder for free for 30 days if you go to shudder.com and use my code POSSESSED30. So let's get into Stanley Kubrick. A little bit of backstory. He's directed 13 movies in total, I believe. He's famous for movies such as 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Shining, obviously. We're going to talk about that mostly today. Clockwork Orange, Eyes Wide Shut, Lolita. He's made a lot of classics, not just in the horror genre. Of course, he's not just a horror director. And he's very well loved, you know, worldwide. He's known as an iconic movie director in Hollywood. However, he was also known for being a very difficult director to work with because he was very neurotic on set and a perfectionist. So we're gonna start with The Shining because that's probably what you're here for, and we're just gonna get into all of that. Now, this is toxic horror movie sets, so this is what took place on the set and while filming The Shining. Specifically, what happened to Shelley Duvall, which we'll get into a little bit later. So The Shining, I think, could be one of his most famous movies in his career. I mean, arguably it is one of his most famous. I don't think you can argue that, but maybe not the most, because I'm sure a lot of people will think 2001: A Space Odyssey is, or any others. He's made a lot of famous movies, just in general, a lot of cult classics. I feel one of the reasons why he pushed the actors in The Shining more than any other performances that he's done in the past was because his previous film that came out prior to The Shining, called Barry Lyndon, did not perform well at the box office. It kind of bombed, and I think he was trying to redeem himself. That's the thing, is he did make movies that were technically bad. I haven't seen all of his movies, but I think that's one of the reasons why he pushed Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall so much in The Shining and filmed for so long, because he really wanted to perfect the movie. He was like that anyways, but I think because his previous movie did so poorly, that's one of the reasons why. Now, this is not an issue by any means, but it's just kind of a fun fact that I read online that I thought I would share. It's kind of like a quirk that Stanley Kubrick has, is that he's terrified of flying. So the beginning shot of The Shining with the car driving through the mountains was of course filmed by a helicopter, because back then there was no drones. And he refused to fly. He would not be on location for that shot at all. He told the camera directors and the crew, get whatever you can. It just needs to be a yellow VW driving through the mountains. And that shot was actually filmed in Montana, and Stanley Kubrick was still in England when that was shot. Now, my first issue with Stanley Kubrick, I'm gonna say some of this comes from personal bias. I'm not trying to, beat around the bush with that. It is a little bit of a personal bias I have against Stanley Kubrick, just because for me, I can't help but get my feelings involved a little bit in what these people went through, and this first issue, where I take a little bit, not personally because it didn't happen to me, but let me just tell you. So my first issue when it comes to creating The Shining was the conflict that Stanley Kubrick had with the book author Stephen King. Stephen King had actually wrote a screenplay for The Shining, and Stanley Kubrick brushed it off and said that King's writing was weak. Can you imagine saying that about just Stephen King? I mean, I understand not everyone loves Stephen King, but you can't deny he's not a good writer. But also saying that about the person who wrote the story that you're adapting into a movie, to say that his writing is weak, then why are you doing this? Like, why are you insulting him like that? I get that directors are gonna wanna rework things and change some things about a book if they're adapting it into a movie, but I just think that was a little bit too far. Also, Stanley Kubrick had the audacity to still call Stephen King at all hours of the night asking for advice in regards to writing the movie. Why would you do that? And to talk about really weird topics, like just random things. Of course, Stephen King went on to make his own version of The Shining, which people say is not as good. I haven't seen it yet, but if you want a whole video comparing the book to the movie to the other movie that Stephen King created, please let me know. But he did this because he hated Stanley Kubrick's version so much. Specifically, he hated the characterization of Wendy in Stanley Kubrick's version of The Shining. He said that she was just emotional and compared her to a screaming dish rag in the movie, and that it was a misogynistic take on Wendy, which I don't think is entirely Stanley Kubrick's fault. Like, I do want to give credit here because he did intend to make Wendy a more independent woman and like have her own story, but Shelley Duvall was actually the one who was like, no, I think she would be like a whiny wife who is like weak and crying and emotional and things like that. So she did have a hand in that, and they actually conflicted a lot on set while working together. They had a lot of arguments and screaming matches because they had different creative visions for Wendy. And I think they tried to meld those two together, and Shelley Duvall still went and did her own thing with it, which I don't think ended up being a good like mix of visions, if that makes sense. But let's get into all of the issues that Shelley Duvall had while filming The Shining, and I think this movie is the greatest example of how difficult it is to work with Stanley Kubrick as a director. I think one of Stanley Kubrick's goals, it had to have been like to set cinematic world records or something, because he would shoot things so many times before it was good enough. And I get it, he is an artistic genius. Like, I don't agree with that, but I know a lot of people think that, so I'm not gonna sit here and argue with that. He was definitely a creative person and very talented. But he did set a couple world records in cinematic history, one being the amount of takes that it took for the scene where, of course, Wendy has the baseball bat and is walking up the stairs. That was shot over 127 times. Shelley Duvall was very dehydrated. She had a severe sore throat from that scene because he kept pushing her and pushing her and pushing her to film that over and over and over again. The Here's Johnny scene with, Jack Nicholson coming through the door was shot over 60 times. So I think that's just something that Stanley Kubrick does a lot, because it's pretty much consistent in a lot of his movies, is he would shoot things at least 30 times before he got a good take enough to where he could edit it all together. Also, the Here's Johnny scene was almost scrapped from the movie because Stanley Kubrick did not get the reference. Personally, my theory about this is I think Stanley Kubrick, whether consciously or unconsciously, is very obsessed with method acting, and I think that was one of his goals. Maybe some of this is obvious, that he really wanted to push them in order to get that emotion out. So he would make them shoot this over and over again, so they were in that frustrated, depleted, like desperate mindset in order to get the scene right. I feel like that is one of his techniques. And method acting is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not always torture. It's not always cruel to the actors by any means. The Blair Witch Project consisted of method acting, where they would actually like withhold food and make them sleep in the woods and have them be sleep deprived to film the scenes, and that really came through in the movie. However, the Blair Witch Project filming was like a month long. The Shining took over a year. I think putting someone in that headspace every single day for over a year would be considered torture. And that's not my word. That's the word of the internet. That's, you know, other people saying that of Shelley Duvall, and that she was actually tortured emotionally, probably physically as well. But Shelley Duvall faced serious health issues in between May and October while filming the movie, and she lost a lot of hair from stress. And I just don't think that that is a good thing. It's not healthy, you know, it's not anything to brag about or write home about, because I don't think you need to put someone through that in order to achieve a good movie. And to be honest, I'm gonna say it, it's not even that good. He put everyone through all of that in order to get that movie. It's not that great. I think it's way overhyped in the horror community. I think what makes it worse is his response to hearing about her not being able to handle it and having like psychological damage from working with him on the movies, because he said that that's what happens when actors are underprepared. So you're just blaming it all on Shelley Duvall on not being a good enough actor, even though you're the one that cast her before even meeting her. He's basically placing the blame onto them, saying, well, if they were better, I wouldn't have to do 100 takes. And I just don't think that's true. If you were a better director, you could get the scene in under 100 takes. And he goes on to say, you cannot act without knowing dialogue. If actors have to think about the words, they can't work on the emotion. So you end up doing 30 takes of something, and still you can see the concentration in their eyes. They don't know their lines. So you just shoot it and hope you can get something out of it in pieces. And that's exactly what Kubrick would do. He would shoot at least 35 takes before saying that that's good enough, and then he would basically just piece it all together, which maybe that's created some, you know, really decent movies. But I think he needs to acknowledge the fact that he is a perfectionist, and most people don't shoot movies in that way, and they get better movies. I'm gonna say it. I was gonna say just as good, but I think there are better horror movie directors out there, well, just better movie directors out there that don't have to emotionally torture their cast in order to get that reaction out of them and in order to get the shot. Duvall herself has claimed to have experienced psychological and emotional torture while filming the movie. She was forced to be in a consistent and constant state of fear and panic and crying for 12 hours a day for a year. He wanted natural emotions, not acted ones, clearly based on his statement. You know, she'd have to carry around Danny for 30 plus takes running through the hotel. That's physically taxing on her body. Also, it's been commonly known that he treated Shelley Duvall very differently on set compared to Jack Nicholson. Even Jack Nicholson has said that to Shelley, that he treats me different than you, and I don't know how you do it. Kubrick never complimented her scenes or told her she was doing good or encouraged her at all on set, while he did that for Jack Nicholson. And I get it, Jack Nicholson's a bigger actor, but it seems a little bit biased, and I don't know if it was all due to the fact that he wanted her to be in that headspace consistently and feel emotionally drained throughout the whole filming process, or if some of it is just a little bit more biased because he knows that Jack Nicholson will nail the scene and so he doesn't have to work with him as much. I don't know. Also, he told the crew to ignore her completely and not show her any kind of sympathy, and Jack Nicholson was so much into method acting during filming The Shining that he was always in that headspace, super angry, and he didn't want to really interact with Shelley Duvall that much because that would probably break him out of character. So she was very, very isolated while filming this and had barely anyone to really lean on or rely on because she was separated from her family for over a year. And, you know, I'm not fully against this kind of method acting or like pushing the actors into this place because Shelley Duvall signed up for this. She, you know, was a willing participant in filming The Shining, and she has said herself that that she does not regret it. However, this kind of method acting where the directors and the crew are pushing them so much, I think is only appropriate when the movie's filming time lasts less than 3 months, you know? When it goes into a year of doing this to someone, that can be like permanently psychologically damaging. Hence why she was in and out of health the whole time. And she has defended him. So I don't want to discredit that she doesn't regret doing it. And outside of directing, she says that he's a very warm person. She can defend him all she wants. In my opinion, there is no other word for that except for torture. And that's exactly what he did. And I think that there are other ways and methods that he could have used to get those results, especially those results with The Shining. Because of his perfectionism, he puts himself and his vision first above anyone else that he's working with. He kind of sees them as props to mold into his vision and doesn't really see them fully as people until he's done directing, and then he's a very nice human being. I think you can be both. I think you could be a very nice director that respects the actors that you're working with pushing them, but not to that point of, you know, mental damage or mental torture and where they have to lose their hair and they're in and out of health because of it. I think you could be a respectful director and also a nice person and still get decent results. And I'm not trying to discredit the good parts. She has claimed that they actually joked around on set sometimes and he was a nice person to her sometimes. That's fine and good. I'm happy that she has some kind of, you know, nice experience to take away from that. However, one thing that makes it worse for me is she was actually nominated for a Raspberry Award, which if you don't know what that is, it's where, I don't know who does it, but it's an organization that nominates worst actors, worst movies, and she was nominated for one of those. So it's basically the opposite of the Oscars. It's for terrible movies. And I think that's something that people just point out about this movie is how terrible Shelley Duvall acted in it. And no one, I mean, now I think people are acknowledging it more, but I remember back in the day, no one really acknowledged the trauma that she went through to film this. I think it just wasn't common knowledge back then. But, you know, instead everyone just points out how bad she was in it or how she's the worst one in it, yet she was the one who went through the most for this movie, and she doesn't even really get the credit for that. Kubrick would tell her on set that she's wasting everyone's time. And if she was such a bad actor to him, he could have recast her. Like, he's done that in other movies. He's completely recast people just because they had differences. I just think his relationship with her was so hot and cold, and that can be traumatic in itself because it's never reliable. She needed support. I think she needed encouragement, and she only got that a couple times, and everything else was just miserable. So she still loves that people talk about her and the movie 30 years later, so of course she doesn't regret it by any means. And she's glad that it became a cult classic because of all her hard work that she put in to it. So I hope that we can all respect Shelley Duvall and know that she deserved better when it comes to The Shining. Again, it's a different time, but torturing a human being for over a year just for the sake of art, for the sake of a movie, I get it, it's art, but is it ethical? Another cinematic record that he set in history was while filming Eyes Wide Shut, which is another controversial movie of his, I would say. This was filmed for over 400 days. Again, that's really nothing new when it comes to Stanley Kubrick. That's pretty common when it comes to his movies. Harvey Keitel was someone who had an issue while filming Eyes Wide Shut with Stanley Kubrick. They had some disagreements. In 2016, he admitted that he was actually fired from the shoot and he felt that he was disrespected by Kubrick on the set. So he was just someone who could not work with that and could not work with his perfectionism. And I just imagine that he's just not a great person to work with professionally. Now, I do want to address the myth that goes around with Eyes Wide Shut because originally I was going to talk about it as something that I think was cruel that he did to the actors. However, looking more into it, it's actually a myth. And that is Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise, who played the leads in Eyes Wide Shut, were married at the time. And in the movie, they have relations with other people. There's like a fantasy scene that's filmed with Nicole Kidman. And there's a rumor that he forced the spouse of the actor at the time filming to be on set when those scenes were filmed, and then he'd film them over and over and over again. Obviously, he gets at least 30 takes, so they had to continuously film these scenes and make their partner watch. And originally, I thought this was another method acting type technique because he wanted Tom Cruise to be in that headspace of, you know, watching his wife do this, and because it's his real wife in real life, that rhymed, then it would cause some emotional torture and thus he would get a better performance. But they were actually closed sets and they weren't allowed to be on each other's sets pretty much at all, and they didn't have a lot of interaction while filming this movie. I also read, this isn't that bad, I think, because it could have been so much worse, but in the orgy scene, in the group scene, Kubrick had like very specific wants for this shot and, you know, specific shots that he wanted to get for the scene, but he didn't really have a full vision for it. And so it kind of ended up going in a route that the models would have to be paid more for, if you know what I'm saying. It started to go a little bit too far into like a realistic type situation, a group situation, and luckily there was a woman named Yolande Snaith who was actually a choreographer at the time who was hired on to work with Kubrick just in the choreography of the movie, but she actually became more of like an art producer for this scene specifically. I think she kind of held him back a little and restrained his vision a little bit because she didn't want to push the models too far and into something that they weren't comfortable with, that they didn't sign up for or anything like that. So there really isn't that much drama when it comes to Eyes Wide Shut as people want to believe, and I just wanted to address that. I'm sure there are other examples from other movies where he was difficult to work with, but those are of course the most famous ones that are commonly known, and obviously I really just wanted to talk about a horror movie because this is a horror channel, so wanted to focus on The Shining. If you know about any other stories involving Stanley Kubrick that you'd like to share down below in the comments, besides maybe the moon landing, I think we've all heard that theory before, but let me know your thoughts. Honestly, I don't think he's a horrible person by any means. I do have some issue with the way he films his movies, but that's just my personal opinion. These videos are very much my personal opinion. Obviously, I'm stating facts here, but I will share my opinion about them because I can't hold back. I can't not do that. I'm not like a journalist where I have to be neutral. I don't have to do that. This is my video. I can do what I want. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. I know Stanley Kubrick's well loved, so I know I'm gonna have people who are very upset with me, especially about the title. I'm sorry, it just sounded too good not to go with it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and I will talk to you soon. Bye.